Good morning, third graders, and happy Monday. The weekend's now over, so I guess now is where we address that things are going to be a little bit different going forward. I've loved seeing those of you commenting and subscribing to my YouTube channel. I'm excited to be posting videos to keep you in the loop. I hope that you're doing your job and continuing to learn. Keep working on those packets. Families who are not here on Friday, we will find a way to get you those packets or other information to study and review. Please continue to check your emails, and I will be checking in throughout the next few weeks. For now, I'm going to take a moment to go through one of the worksheets I sent home, and then I think I'm going to read a story and maybe introduce you to some of the things we're going to cover in math. Keep following these videos and let me know if you have any questions. This is one of the worksheets that I sent home. If you don't have it yet, I will be emailing it out. So again, continue to check your emails. We have done a worksheet like this at school. Each day, I ask that you just do the day that it says. So Monday is main idea. Remember, main idea is what the story is mostly about. And then your supporting details are pieces of information that you pull from the passage to help you answer what the main idea is. So food for life. Read the paragraph, talks about vitamin C, so that's good. And then write down what the story is mostly about, and then 2 details that you pulled from the text to support your main idea. Tomorrow, the topic is character traits. So I don't think that's one that we had last week, but you're going to fill in the blank with a character trait that best fits the description of each character. So let's do Taylor together, and then you can do George on your own tomorrow, which is Tuesday. Taylor tapped her feet on the pavement and looked at her watch. Susan was a whole minute later to their lunch date, and Taylor was quite irritated. Susan knew how blank Taylor was. Taylor couldn't believe she was late yet again. So it sounds like Taylor is always on time. So a word I could use to describe Taylor would be timely. Susan knew how timely Taylor was. I understand why Taylor would be frustrated then if her friend Susan didn't show up on time. So your job is to either think of another word for Taylor to put there to describe her, and then read about George and figure out what word describes him. I will go over Wednesdays, which is inferencing, further. Thursday and Friday further as well. The bonus for this week is imagine your ideal bedroom. Describe it in detail and then draw one corner of the room in detail. Ooh, I love that. I don't know if on YouTube you can attach pictures, but if you draw something here and you want to send it to me, you can attach it on the YouTube link if that's possible, or you can email it to me. All right, awesome. Okay, so it's time to read a story out loud. We haven't read this one in class yet. I don't know if a substitute did when I wasn't here, but it's usually just hid away in my cabinet. It's called The Kid Who Changed the World. I think it's a really great story, and you all have the power to make a difference as well. And it is based on a true story. The author is Andy Andrews, and it's illustrated by Philip Hurst. I really enjoy the pictures in here. They're a very beautiful watercoloring type of picture, so pay attention to those. And I know I changed the direction of my camera, so hopefully this turns out okay on YouTube. All right, let's get started. The Kid Who Changed the World. Dedicated to Austin and Adam Andrews, the 2 kids who have already changed my world. I love you both so very much. I want to tell you a story about the kid who changed the world. His name was Norman Bolog. Norman lived on a farm in Iowa. He loved to play hide and seek with his little sister in their father's cornfield. Norman was tall and skinny, with hair so light it looked like the silk that was sprouted from the ears of corn. Norman was very good at hiding in the cornfields. Norman tiptoed quietly so his sister couldn't hear him. He crept along until he was just close enough to catch him. Gotcha! The girls giggled and squealed. Now you hide, Norman. Norman ran to hide in the field, careful not to knock down any corn stalks. Just yesterday, his father reminded him, "You know, son, we're blessed to have all this corn. There are many people in the world who do not have enough to eat." What would it be like to be hungry all the time? Norman wondered as he looked at the endless row of corn. There has to be a way this corn can feed the hungry people, he thought. Right then and there, Norman decided to change the world. Norman learned everything he could about plants. When he was grown, he worked for a man named Mr. Wallace. Mr. Wallace said, "Norman, I want to use what you learned in school to make special seeds. These special seeds will grow into super plants and feed more people than ordinary plants." To make the special seeds, Norman had to go to faraway places and work in the rain and summer heat, but he never gave up. Finally, Norman developed the special seed that grew into super plants. Norman's special seed of corn and wheat and rice were sent all over the world, and the super plant fed the hungry people, just like Norman dreamed about as a boy. A whole family could eat dinner from one super plant. And guess what? Norman saved more than 2 billion people from starving. 2 billion! It's true, Norman was the kid who changed the world. Or maybe it was a kid named Henry. I want to tell you a story about the kid who changed the world. His name was Henry Wallace. Henry's father was a professor, and one of his students was a young man named George. Henry loved to go with George on expeditions in the countryside. George knew about the plants, more about the plants than anyone Henry had ever met. Hey, pause. Henry Wallace? Who was it that Norman worked with? Mr. Wallace. So there's Mr. Wallace, and there he is as a kid. Henry peered over the edge of the water to inspect a plant growing on the bank. "Don't get too close to the water, Henry," George said. "Your daddy will have a fit if you get eaten by a hippopotamus." Henry laughed. "Hippos don't live in Iowa. I'm just trying to get a better look at this flower." "You know, Henry, God gave us plants as a way to learn. We can use the knowledge to help others. It's a very important mission." "George, I want that to be my mission. Will you help me?" "Of course. Remember, Henry, God made you to make a difference, and I believe you will." Henry learned so much about plants that he grew up to be the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, so of plants. Then Henry Wallace became the Vice President of the United States of America. From the important office, Vice President Wallace, you can still call him Henry, continued his mission to learn how plants could help people. As Vice President, Henry wanted to help people around the world grow more food, so he hired a young man named Norman Borlaug, the same Norman who developed the special seed that grew into super plants that fed the hungry people. So, you see, because Henry is the one who came up with the idea of special seeds and hired Norman to make them, it was really Henry who changed the world. Or maybe it was George. I want to tell you a story about the kid who changed the world. His name was George Washington. Now, before we continue, you must know that he is not George Washington, the president. The U.S. President George Washington lived a long time before the George Washington in this story. George's father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was very young. But the good news is that a nice couple named Moses and Susan Carver adopted George and made him part of their family. Have you ever heard of George Carver before? "Well, George, what have you got there?" asked his neighbor, Mrs. McLeod, as she plopped down on a tree stump beside the young boy. "I'm whittling a crutch for my friend who hurt his ankle." "Just look at you, creating that from a big old tree branch. George, you've got a sharp mind and a kind heart." "Thank you, ma'am, but it's not much. Won't take me too long. I'll bet your friend will be mighty grateful for that crutch. You know, George, little things can make a big difference. Everything we do matters. Every action you take, even small things, can change the world." Sure enough, George Washington Carver changed the world. He became a teacher and an inventor. For instance, he invented 266 things from the peanut that we still use today. From the sweet potato, George invented 88 things we still use today. But he did something much more important than that. That's something you can do. You can look up the things that George Carver made from peanuts and sweet potatoes. When George Washington Carver was at Iowa State University, he had a teacher named Professor Wallace. On weekends, George would roam the field and forest with the professor's 6-year-old son, Henry, teaching the boy about plants and how many ways they could be used to help people. Now let's see here. Norman made the seed that grew into plants that fed the world's hungry people, but he couldn't have done it without Henry, who had the idea to make super plants and hired him. But Henry would not have had the idea without George, who spent so much time teaching young Henry about plants. So there you have it. George Washington Carver was the kid who changed the world. Wait, we forgot about his mom, Susan. I want to tell you about a story about the kid who changed the world. Her name was Susan. She lived on a farm with her mom and her dad way up north. Susan pulled nails out of old barn wood while her pet rooster, Buzz, watched. "Susan," her mother called as she walked towards her in the field, "what are you doing?" "Well, I figured if I got these nails out of this wood, we could reuse it for something like patching the chicken coop or building a playhouse." "Thank you, Susan. Those are wonderful ideas. I'm sure Buzz will appreciate a snug home come winter," she said. "He hasn't helped with a single nail," Susan giggled. "You know, dear, every choice you make, good or bad, can make a difference. I'm proud of you for making a good choice today." When Susan grew up, she married a man named Moses Carver, and together with a few workers, they managed a farm. They were very happy, but one night some men tried to hurt them. Outlaws called Quantrells, raiders, rode into the farm. They burned down Susan and Moses' barn, and kidnapped some of the workers. One of the people they kidnapped was a boy named George. Susan had to do something. She and her husband searched and searched and finally found young George. Moses and Susan even traded their favorite black horse in return for the little boy. That night, beside the fireplace, as Susan rocked that baby, she told George that they would adopt him. Susan also promised to give the boy their name. As the baby drifted off to sleep, Susan whispered, "Good night, little George Washington Carver." So if Susan and Moses hadn't have saved George from the outlaws, George wouldn't have grown up to take Henry on walks in the forest. Then Henry wouldn't have become interested in plants and later hired Norman. Without Henry's idea, Norman wouldn't have developed the special seeds that grew into superplants. And without the superplants, 2 billion people would have nothing to eat. Isn't it? It's odd, isn't it? Every time something happens, something else happens. That's called the butterfly effect. When a butterfly flaps its wings, it moves tiny pieces of air that move other tiny pieces of air that move other tiny pieces of air. In fact, on the other side of the world, they might be feeling a big whoosh of wind, all because a butterfly flapped its wings here just a few minutes ago. That means every little thing you do matters. What you did yesterday, what you do today, and what you do tomorrow. God made your life so important that every move you make, every action you take matters. And not only for you or the people around you. Everything you do matters for everyone and for all the time. When you think about it like that, wow, that means you can be the kid who changes the world. The end. I hope you enjoyed. Okay, so the last thing we're going to peek at is some math things that we're going to learn this week, and we'll touch base on it later, But I thought I'd get your mind going, keep it working. You are responsible for keeping your mind going too. And make sure you're getting outside. It's still beautiful out. It's nice and sunny. So get outside and play a little bit. But I'm going to read you a poem, and it is about Galen Guy. And it helps us remember the order of our liquid measurements. So, I don't know if I can turn my camera around while recording. Nope, can't. Didn't work. So I'm going to read it. In the kingdom of G, there lived 4 queens. Each queen had 2 children, a prince and a princess. The prince and the princess needed 2 crowns each, a fancy one and one for play. So this is what I just read to you. The G, so that stands for Galens. And then 4 queens, so the 4 courts inside. Each queen has 2 children, a prince and a princess. The P's stand for pints. And each prince and princess have 2 crowns, which stands for cup, a fancy one and one for play. Here's another way to look at this. This measuring cup, this is 1 cup. So if I filled it up with water to here, it's 1 cup. And we've talked about how there's different types to measure things, different ways to measure things. So a cup is one type of measurement, an ounce is another. So 8 ounces equal a cup. But for this cup, I then have a pint. And the poem told us that each princess or prince has 2 crowns. So 2 cups fit into 1 pint. So if I filled this up and poured it into here, I would need to do that 2 times. So 1 cup, 2 cups equals 1 pint. And then we have court, and we learned that each queen has 2 children, 1 prince and 1 princess. So we would take 2 pints, and that fills up a quart. The quart then can go into a gallon, not just 2 times, but 4 times, because this is half a gallon here, and then this is a whole gallon. So we would need 4 of these to fit into 1 of these. So gallon, quart, pint, cup. Wanted to let you know that Sparky has moved to my house temporarily, and he's doing pretty good.